and it's a pleasure to be with you. It's an important panel for us talking about implementation of public policy in the challenge that we face. And in Brazil, we face implementation public policy challenges here. So, and for us, your experience regarding delivery unity and also talking about deliver results to citizens, it's so important right now because we have laws. The rule of law in Brazil is not the problem, but to achieve concrete results in education, health, security, and in different areas of the public sector is a challenge. So this forum is trying, it's about government, but also is about how civil society can influence the government. And maybe it's a good strategy, try to stimulate the government or to create delivery units with the government or maybe financing to try to achieve more results to our citizens. So I will start. If you could tell us about the concept of delivery units, because I don't know if our public is familiar with this initiative and how it works and pros and cons. Could you tell
Sure.
us?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Daniela, for the invitation to be part of this panel. I'm delighted to be invited. And I think the theme that you've chosen of how government can be more effective, how public policy can not just be argued about and decided, but really implemented in a way that makes a difference to millions of people, that is such an important theme. And it's an important theme for Brazil, as you were saying, but it's also an important theme for all of Latin America and actually for everywhere in the world. I've just spent the last first half of this year working with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, helping him design a delivery unit to implement his mission for domestic policy. As the pandemic fades, he wants a really clear approach to driving delivery that will change the lives for the better of millions of British people. That's what he hopes. So I've spent the last 6 months doing that. So coming to your question, it's in too many governments around the world at province or state level, as well as at federal level, the government, the ministers, and often the civil servants too, think that deciding the policy is the difficult bit, and after that, it just implementation takes care of itself. So it's like in those heads, it's 90% policy and 10% implementation. But the reality is the other way around. Getting the policy right isn't easy, but even if you get it right, 90% of the challenge is actually making it happen in every far-flung corner of a big country like Brazil, or even a smaller country like the United Kingdom. So the first thing that's really important before we get to delivery units is understanding how important it is to think through implementation. How's it going to work? How are you going to get it done? It's no good being elected for 4 years or 5 years or whatever the term is, and realizing at the end that all the things you hope to do never really got done. And there are other challenges. Most governments, and we've seen it a lot, obviously, with the pandemic around the world, most governments are constantly dealing with a series of crises. Things go wrong. You take Australia last year with the pandemic and bushfires. And these crises are happening all the time. And you know this is true in Brazil as well. And unless the government is really clear before the crises come, what it's going to try and do and how it's going to get them done, how it's going to implement them, then it will get blown off course. And a prime minister or a president can finish a 4-year term and think, where did that go? What did I do? All I did was fight fires or deal with crises. So the point of a delivery unit, now I get to your questions. It's a long answer. Now I get to your question. The point of a delivery unit is to have a small, really well-organized, function close to the Prime Minister or President that takes responsibility on his or her behalf for making sure that the priorities get delivered. So the delivery unit doesn't do the delivery, it checks that the big ministries responsible for doing delivery. So if education is the priority, is the education minister set up to deliver? How will it work? How will the education minister influence out there in the world, not just in the ministry? So the delivery unit's job is to secure delivery, to pursue delivery. And to do that, when I've set up delivery units, like for Boris Johnson, like in the past for Tony Blair, like for the Prime Minister of New South Wales in Australia, like for Justin Trudeau in Canada, like for the Chief Minister of Punjab in Pakistan. So lots of countries have done this. There are 5 questions you have to answer, and I can take you through those if you'd like. So the first question you have to answer is, what are you trying to do? Seems really obvious, but lots of prime ministers, presidents, governments find it hard to be really clear about their priorities. Sometimes people don't like talking about priorities because if they talk about their priorities, it implies that the other things are not as important. And of course, that is what priority means. But if people don't like the word priority, you can say, what's your mission? When you finish this term of office, what do you be able to tell the people of your country or your state in Brazil or the British people if you're Boris Johnson, or if you're Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales, the people of New South Wales? What do you want to say you've achieved over that term of office? So being clear about the mission is really important, and being clear about the priorities, that's one part of answering what you're trying to do. But the other is, how much change do you want to make? It's not enough to say, health is my priority, because I'm then going to say to you, well, how will the health service be different if you deliver? Will there be fewer cancer patients? Will more cancer patients survive? Will people wait less time to have an operation? What will be different about your health service? So it's not enough to have a general health our priority. You've got to say very specifically, we're going to try and achieve these things.
You say ultimate outcomes.
Yes, and it's really important to define the outcome in terms of the changed lives of people. Most people, we're all human beings trying to get through the day, aren't we? And life is not always easy. It's sometimes a challenge, and we don't necessarily, unless we're an obsessive like me, want to spend all our time thinking about government. We want to enjoy our family. We want our children to grow up well and do well, and all the basics of life and fulfillment. But if government doesn't do things properly, all those things get disrupted. If corruption gets in the way, or if bad government means the road or the bus doesn't work, or the school is poor, or the teacher doesn't show up. I've seen all these things all over the world, or the healthcare is bad and you spend all your life savings on some massive health crisis. These are things that ruin people's lives, that prevent them from fulfilling their ambitions. So government being effective is important. And that's why when I say to a government, what are you trying to do? I want them to define it in terms of changed outcomes for citizens. So if I take Boris Johnson, he said, I want to measurably make sure that everybody gets back into jobs after the pandemic. And we'll get that done. Or back when I was talking to Tony Blair, he said, I want nobody to wait longer than 18 weeks from being diagnosed to having the operation. So these are very specific goals. So that's point one. Identify your priorities and your mission, and be really clear about the specific goals you're trying to achieve. Question 2 is, how are you trying to do it? Again, it's a really obvious question, and it's about doing some really clear planning. Too many governments around the world, when they come to planning, they write some beautiful document called a plan, and it has a beautiful cover with a nice picture, and they publish it and the newspapers write about it, and then the nice plan gets put on a shelf or in a library and completely ignored. I'm not talking about that kind of plan. I'm talking about a real plan. And the things you need in a plan are the actions you're going to take, the deadline for each of those actions, and the person responsible for each of those actions. So if it's a proper delivery plan, you know the goals because you've answered question 1. What are the actions you're going to take? Who's responsible for taking them, and what is the deadline for every action? But also in the plan, you need to show how the data, the whatever it is you're tracking, how will that change as you implement the plan? We call that a trajectory. The data's here now, you want it to be there, how will it change over time? And then you can monitor progress against the trajectory. And the other thing you need in a plan, and this gets neglected in many governments, is you need to understand the delivery chain. You're a minister sitting in Brasilia or London or Paris or Sydney or Toronto or Ottawa. What connects you to the citizen who's going to benefit? So if you implement your policy, there'll be a lot of connections. If you want to improve literacy in primary schools, the child will be taught by a teacher. The teacher will be influenced by a school principal. The principal will be influenced by some local or regional government. They will be influenced by some regional or national government, whatever you can draw. And then inside the ministry, there'll be another chain. You have to identify all the links in the chain, see where the weaknesses are, see where the breaks in the chain are, and think how you're going to, at each level in the chain, have some pressure on people to change what they do. Unless the teacher changes what they do all day, the child's literacy will not improve, unless it's a good teacher, of course. So you have to think of the pressure for change, but also the support to make the change. So if you're a teacher and you're under pressure to improve your literacy teaching, it's also good if the government will help support you to learn how to teach literacy from a really good teacher. So identify the delivery chain and identify at every level what the pressure for change is and what the support to make the changes. That's planning. So that's question 2. Question 1, what are you trying to do? Question 2, how are you trying to do it? So question 3 is that all these questions are very, very obvious. Question 3 is, how will you know at any given moment whether you're on track? So if you're sitting in a capital city somewhere in the world and you're an official or a minister and you're responsible for one of these big goals, how do you know if it's working? Maybe all the people you meet all day just say, oh yes, it's going wonderfully, Minister. Everything's fine. Especially if they're talking to the Prime Minister or President. Yes, everything's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. But that's not really very helpful because you're just left uncertain. So what do you need? So you need to know if it's working. You need good data coming in from all over the country on a regular basis. We live in 2021. You can get good data from anything. In Punjab, Pakistan, where I worked for 10 years, there are 55,000 schools. There are 35 million children. We got data from every single school every month on how many teachers were present, how many children were present, whether the children were learning, whether the water ran in the taps, whether the toilets were functional, whether there was a boundary wall, basic stuff. And we did that in Punjab, Pakistan. Before the pandemic, one of the things we wanted to improve was vaccination for young children, those early childhood diseases. And it wasn't going well. So we changed the system and all the vaccinators had a tablet. So we knew exactly, we could track them on GPS, every vaccinator, we knew where they were. When they vaccinated a child, they took a photograph of the child and the photograph went straight to a computer in Lahore, the capital of Punjab. So now every day you see which children are being vaccinated because the photos are flying into the computer. You can see where the gaps are. Then you send the vaccinators to where the gaps are. So you map using GPS every child who's been vaccinated. And then just to check, you have a call center with 40 or 50 people who call the mothers and say, our records suggest your child was vaccinated yesterday, is that right? And they say, yes, it was. And was it a good experience? They say, yes, it was. So you've got this system. Look, if we can do that in Punjab, Pakistan, anybody can do these things anywhere in the world. So this question about how do you know whether you're on track? Good data, regular visits to the front line. if you're a minister or an official, don't sit in your capital city in your office. Get out and see what's happening. And that's easier once the pandemic is over, obviously. And then finally, under this question, you need routines. You need to build regular check-ins. We called them, in the Blair government, we called them stock takes. Every 2 months, Tony Blair meets the Minister for Health, and I present the data. This is what the trajectory says. This is what's actually happened. Here are the problems. Let's solve them. And every 2 months we do that. Rather than what most governments do is they read some story in a paper saying it's not going badly, and they summon the minister and they say, what's all this? That kind of crisis. I call it government by spasm, just reacting. This is normal in large parts of the world, but if you can get away from it and build government by routine, so you've got the data coming in and you review the meeting. In Punjab, Pakistan, I went every 2 months for many years, for 5 or 6 times a year, to sit with the chief minister and review progress as the data came in. We had a map of Punjab, 36 districts, which ones are doing well, which ones are doing less well, where there's a problem, what are we going to do about it? Simple routines in place of crises. So question 1, what are you trying to do? Question 2, how are you trying to do it? Question 3, how will you know whether you're on track at any given moment? And question 4, when you're not on track, what are you going to do about it? A lot of governments, sometimes it's a middle ranking official, realize there's a problem. They see something that tells them it's not working. And they think, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll be all right in a few months. It's a mistake. When there's a problem, you need to understand it and do something about it. And if the first thing doesn't work, you need to do something else. So if you've got those regular stock take reviews, then you can use those to identify the problems and then task a team, go away and solve this problem and come back in 2 months with a solution. And now you've got the whole thing working. And we designed in the Blair government and around the world since many ways for solving problems quickly. The big mistake governments make is they underestimate the scale of the problem, or they just hope it'll sort of go away if they ignore it and neglect it. And then the final question, this is where we get straight to the delivery unit. The delivery unit's working for the president or the prime minister or the chief minister of Punjab, as I was describing earlier, or Justin Trudeau, where we spent 4 years building a delivery unit. And you're designing this system. So you're making sure the data is in place, you're making sure every department has proper delivery plans, you're making sure that these routine stock take review meetings happen, that the data is in the right place, it's all beautifully presented. And the thing about data, by the way, you have to present it in ways that even a non-statistician can understand it. It's unfair to expect a prime minister or a minister to be a statistical wizard. So beautifully presented data, very clear, very simple, with integrity. So that's what the delivery unit's doing. And then it's just making sure all the time that people are on the case of solving the problems where there are problems, making sure the data is coming in, and fundamentally not accepting excuses for not delivering. So you have to believe. I've written, published a book this year called Accomplishment, and it looks at delivery, not just in government, but in business, in successful sports teams, in science, in art. And in all these cases where great things are achieved, you see somebody is constantly insisting then that the ambition can be achieved. Too many, we all know this in our own lives. It's very easy. You take on something ambitious and you kind of give up because it's just too difficult. We've all done it. But if in government, if you've made a big commitment to the people, you're going to do this, you need somebody who's not going to give up on the ambition, who believes it can be done. And that's a fundamental task. So there's a kind of, there's a thing about believing in the mission. And then finally, the last thing for a delivery unit is you've got to build relationships that work. What you can't do is go around yelling at people. You work for the Prime Minister, you go and yell at officials. After a while, or ministers, after a while, they're going to stop telling you the truth, because if things are going badly, you're going to yell at them. No, you don't. You ask them good questions. You persist. You keep saying, and you're always saying, have you understood the problem? Can we help you understand the problem? And then when we do understand the problem, then you say, which is question 5, can we help? How do we solve this problem? And this is the last thing I'll say. If you help a government department solve a problem and then things get back on track, you give them the credit. The delivery is in the background. You don't want to be in the news. You don't want big egos. You want people who will collaborate with others and get the job done and help represent the president or the prime minister in an effective way. If you get all of that right, the answers to those 5 questions, it makes an enormous difference to government. And I knew that first when I did this work with Tony Blair nearly 20 years ago, but I've now seen it happen in so many different contexts, in every continent, big countries, small countries, cities, regions, federal countries, not federal countries, all different cultures. This process of answering those 5 questions rigorously and then sticking with it it does work. And the only thing the politician, let's say it's a president or a prime minister or the governor of one of your states in Brazil, the only thing they need to do is first of all stick with the agenda and keep explaining it to the public, because politicians are generally very good communicators. They also need to not get distracted, not allow these distractions that affect everybody to distract them too much. So they need to persist with the agenda. Interestingly, I've calculated the amount of time that Tony Blair spent in a year on delivery back then when I was working with him. And it was somewhere between 75 and 100 hours per year. So 2 hours a week. 2 hours a week will deliver you your domestic priorities. That is a really good deal. Because you're probably, a prime minister or president is probably working, I don't know, 60, 70 hours a week. For 2 of those hours, if you get the system working, you can be sure that you're going to deliver. And when I left Downing Street in 2005, before I went back to work for Boris Johnson recently, Tony Blair said to me, the best thing about the delivery unit was that I knew that whatever I was doing out there in the world, and we had September the 11th, 2001, we had a war in Afghanistan, a war in Iraq, we had all these things going on. I knew that you, Michael, and your team were 100% of the time focused on the things the British people cared about most. So, and he's getting a monthly note telling him, so without having to spend too much time on it, he knows it's on track, and he knows if something's off track, I'll brief him and we'll help solve the problem. Any government can do this. It's not conceptually difficult. It's just, it requires rigor and consistency and determination.
I have a question about this last thing. As a vice secretary in São Paulo, I set impact goals, outcomes, and intermediate goals to achieve the impact goals in my secretary. And I design a plan how to implement with data and tracking all the results. And it's delivery unit only works if the political leader is committed to, or we could do something in a different way.
It does. Yes, it's very difficult to do this if the political leader is not interested, doesn't have priorities, doesn't care. That is fundamental. And although it only took 2 hours a week for Tony Blair, when I needed his backing, I always had that. That is really fundamental. So in the stocktake meeting where he does turn up, he has to be clear that we're not giving up on this. Yes, we do have to solve the problem. It requires discipline from the political leader. Not a huge amount of time, but it does require rigor and discipline. And when I finished working for Boris Johnson in July, I wrote him a note. And one of the things I said is, the system is now set up. It requires you to give a couple of hours a week and to back. He's got a wonderful person running his delivery unit. She ran the vaccine rollout for the UK. She's fantastic. She's called Emily Lawson. So I said to the Prime Minister, you've got to stick with this. It only requires 2 hours a week, but it needs to be organized. You need to give the time for those review meetings and make sure they get in your diary. And you need to back Emily Lawson, support her all the way through, and make that visible. I think he will do that. Now, so it doesn't require a lot from a prime minister, but it does require exactly what you say. They've got to stick with the agenda. They've got to keep doing it. And then they've got to do what they do best, politicians, which is explain to the people. And often when you're delivering something difficult, it gets worse before it gets better. So that requires political courage. As things get worse, all the people say, oh, we should never be doing this, it's all terrible. And the prime minister's got to say, no, this will transform our country. But we knew there was going to be a difficult phase. We're going through that phase, but the underlying changes are beginning to happen. You see this in, people in Brazil love football. You see it in football matches. Sometimes a team is under pressure, but you can see that the quality is there, and there's a good chance it'll come through. And or over the season, a league season or a whatever. So I think the Prime Minister just needs to focus on the agenda, keep focusing on the agenda, give the couple of hours a week I mentioned, support the head of delivering it, and explain to people what's working, and when there are difficulties, explain why there are difficulties and how we're going to get through them.
I think that you are completely right. And one problem is the politics are away from the results to the citizen. I feel this. Yeah. I've been working with politics all my life, and I love this job. It's my experience as vice secretary was the most wonderful experience of my life. But I don't think that politicians today, the most of them, have the idea that they are there to deliver results and better quality of life to citizens and all this. It's all about a game. It's a game. It's something like Hollywood and gossips. And in this, think more deeply about this. Do you think that the civil society could has a role in this game, or for example, influence the government or politicians to deliver, and then maybe the civil society or foundation or private sector coalitions could ask or demand our governors, our government, to create a delivery unit or to be accountable for their results, not only their the debate or the speeches. And do you think the civil society could do that?
I do think civil society has a very significant role to play, and I first I want to say I think you explain that one of the big challenges in modern politics and modern government very, very well. That there's a political game going on, which is quite divorced from the actual task of delivering results. And if it goes too far, I'm talking globally now, it will be very, very damaging to our collective future. So the first thing is, if we can get more governments, and many do this, to, even if they know they have to play the game. If you're a political leader, you do have to do that. But if at least they have an agenda that is clear and will make a difference, and then they can keep explaining, that will help. But civil society can help, I think, in 2 or 3 ways. The first is to find ways to make becoming a politician, going into politics, more attractive. Support people, encourage people. The Canadian Liberals, Justin Trudeau's party, they did a lot of work to encourage more women to come into politics in Canada. He wanted to have at least half his party's MPs to be women. and they had a campaign called Ask Her to Run, and Liberal Party members went out in the community, not just to members of the Liberal Party, and they said, actually, Daniela, you'd be a very good politician, and if you want to come in, this is what we stand for as Liberals, we'll encourage them, and they train people, and that's how they got more. Now, so that's just one example, but I think civil society can really help encouraging people, particularly from women and men are still unequally represented in politics, but also from minority groups and the areas of a country not so represented. So there's a role. The second is to bring a commentary on government that goes beyond the game that you described and does talk about, well, what are they actually getting done on our behalf? So a kind of because the media is a real problem in this, because it loves reporting the game, and that there's the media reports the game and the politicians play the game, and then it doesn't get, the kind of things you're talking about don't get mentioned. So I think civil society can change that. If the government should try to change it as well, but people always dismiss, people are cynical about governments, but if civil society says, actually, we've got a big housing challenge and the government's doing really well on this aspect of it, but they've got challenges here, and it's a proper commentary, that can really help. And then the third is to bring ideas, insights, information, training, development, all those things to ministers and officials so that they can see what good government looks like. And there's a maybe I said three things, but maybe there's a fourth thing, which is also that in some cases the civil society can become the deliverers of government service. So government doesn't have to do everything itself; it can commission others, and civil society might be in some cases better at providing services than government, and so you can break the monopolies, but also bring in new providers and new ideas.
Another thing is, I don't know if you are aware about a law in Brazil, a social responsibility law. It's something that I used to work years ago. I helped to write a law in Brazil. It's very similar to the tax. It's not tax. It's a tax responsibility law.
Right.
That said the state cannot spend more than 6%, and all the data about financial system in Brazil will be get together, and we will have goals to inflation, to superavit, to and we as civil society, we start a movement to have an social goals, social responsibility law. So it would be mandatory as a major or a government, the federal level, set goals, set result goals, set out the ultimate outcomes. And because that's it, they say, I will improve the quality of education, but improve, what is it?
Yes, exactly. Well, that's I didn't know about that work in Brazil, and I'm happy to hear about it. In the UK, I did some work for the Treasury, our finance ministry, which is quite similar to what you described. So when they spend money, when the Treasury gives money to the police or schools or whatever, my recommendation in the report was that they should look at four things, and usually in the past they've only looked at one thing, so that they do check whether the money's spent on the thing it was intended to. That is important. It's like an accountant approach. It's important. So that's one pillar. I said there were four. The second pillar is that money delivering any outcomes? Let's say it's a 3-year allocation. What outcomes will you try to get over those 3 years? That's the second pillar.
Yeah, we are far from it here.
Yeah, and then the third pillar is, what do the users of the service that you're providing think about it? And what do the citizens think about it? So if you're the British government, like many governments around the world, is spending money to try to deal with mental health problems. But you know, and I know, everybody knows, you can't solve a mental health problem just by providing a service. The person with the problem has to engage. If they engage properly, and then you're more likely to solve the mental health problem. But if you put it in treasury terms, you're more likely to get better value for money. You'll solve more problems for the same amount of money. So the engagement of the user of the service, of the staff of the service, and the citizens who pay the tax, this is important. So that's the third pillar. And then the fourth pillar, I call it stewardship, thinking for the long run. So our Minister of Health a few years ago decided that we didn't have enough doctors in training. So there are more medical schools, more doctors in training now than there were 5 years ago. It takes 8 years to train a doctor. So he won't get any outcome in 3 years or 1 year, certainly not 1 year. But he's thinking for the long run of the health service. He's thinking, it's a stewardship thought. I want to leave the health service better than I found it. And every minister and every big program should think about those four things. Are we spending the money on what it was intended for? Is it delivering goals over the time the money's allocated? Is it engaging people? And are we thinking in stewardship terms? And you think about the environmental and climate change challenges that we face. This stewardship thing is really important, and it's missing from the way we think about public money.
But thank you so much. For me, it's an honor to be to listen to you.